Excellent. Okay, so I think where we were, you'd just explained how the goose had met the crow, and how the goose and the crow were talking in rhyme, despite the fact that you hadn't written rhyming poetry yourself for a while. And we were going to dip into the Southwark mysteries and the shrine of
Cool.
the crows. So feel
That's
free to
great. Well,
dive
I
in with
think
them.
simplest is to give you a bit of the rhyme and let it speak for itself, you know, because then you see the strangeness of it, maybe. So this is just one complete section in like maybe a 20-minute continuous poem that came down that night. In fact, there was even more of it than that. So this is just a little bit of it. And it's the goose definitely talking. Yes, I've been here before, dear. Oft times in chastened circumstance. I lay with Master Geoffrey at the Tabard, making dalliance afore wending on his pilgrimage to tell a tale of Canterbury. And I rode out beside him as the child of Mary Overy went riding for a vision of humanity, man, God, and beast communing for one moment in eternity, and the healing of the sick and the questioning divinity who asks herself, what am I, to permit such wanton misery and compassion for all souls that dwell in shadows of mortality, compelling her to take on very flesh of that infirmity until she's born a crafty whore, stewed in a Southwark hostelry, and using all her wherewithal to take a pilgrim's fancy and lay with him and play with him, and open eyes to see the goddess that on judgment day shall stand by us and make our plea. And I was in that miller's wife who pushed her tush at Absalom, who kissed he many a wench's lip, but nary such a hairy one. You don't know me yet, dear. You will, dear, I promise you. I am a tricksy tart, dear. My aim is to astonish you. So that's like a bit that came down pretty much complete around midnight that night. And you could see that it had totally captivated my mind in a sense. All I could do was write it down. I wasn't in control of where it was going really, and it really felt like all I could do was kind of surrender to the goose and take my chances that she was a good one, because she was clearly a powerful one, whatever it was that had been conjured up. And that's how it was. The whole night was like journeys with the goose and John Crow, and journeys in mind, and then even walking out and around that part of Southwark in the middle of the night and visiting these sites and getting all these new insights and finding other places I didn't even know about. And at the end of the night, I had this poem, The Book of the Goose, and then that grew into, well, it was the first of 7 or 8, depending how you count, of these vision books. So they're poems kind of channeled. I'd say they're a form of authentic mediumship, you know, in the sense that they have an identity and they contain a knowledge and a kind of backstory all of their own that I didn't sit down and consciously determine in any way. And so anyway, that was the first part of the Southwark Mysteries, and strange things happened from then on, really. So within 2 or 3 years, I'd written a mystery play that was performed in Shakespeare's Globe and Southwark Cathedral. And in fact, it was on the 23rd of April, 2000, which was St. George's Day, Shakespeare's birthday, and Easter Sunday. Wow. So it caused a huge ruckus in the church with, well, huge ruckus. A few fundamentalist Christians were shocked by the thought that this such a work was going to be performed in the cathedral.
Essentially, a poem about prostitutes was performed in a cathedral.
Yes, well, it grew into a very strange mystery play that was informed by, in a sense, a really interesting tussle I had with the Dean of Southwark, and I say tussle in a very creative, determined I was going to write an authentic Christian mystery play, and I was equally determined that I was going to be true to the spirit of the goose who had opened these parts.
I'm not sure if it's your internet or mine, but things have got a bit wobbly.
At this point, through the Southwark Mysteries, and this is what this very much sought to embody, I suppose, something that went deeper than just the obvious. What's the
My
word?
internet, bear with me. Sorry.
Than the sense of eternal opposition. But so what happened was it grew from poems into. Are you okay there?
My internet's cut
You
out.
still with me?
Bear with me.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what's happened. Bear with me a second. My fuse box has gone out, so the power went out in my internet and a few other things. That's why the light's not as good as it was either. The lamp's gone out, so I just need to flick the fuse box.
Okay. Yeah, man.
I think that's dealt with now. I just need to make sure that I need to make sure that the internet that I'm using is the right one and it's not right there. So yeah, we definitely got all of the poem. But I think we missed a bit of what you were saying about the Southwark Mysteries just afterwards.
Yeah. Are we back on?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know what we missed, but I was speaking about the Southwark Mysteries, how the visionary poem that unfolded on the night of the 23rd November 1996, the Book of the Goose, was the first of 7 vision books. That the Book of the Crow, the Book of the New South Bank, the Book of the Honest John. So each book explored a different aspect of this kind of revelation of the goose, of this sex worker spirit, come back to reveal the spirit in the flesh, the sacred in the profane, eternity in time. This is one of the themes running through the whole work. And so the first part of it was these poems, the vision books. The second part was this mystery play, which has Jesus in it and everything. He's just a radical Jesus. He's like the outcast God. And then, and which was very orthodox, of course, around the 2nd century AD, as the church were keen to assure me.
Right.
I'm only a heretic for the last couple of millennium. And then the third part was the glossolalia, and that was like all the things it triggered in me about the magic that seemed to be waking up in Southwark at this time. Because, I mean, this definitely started, I'm a writer, and this started as a literary work. That was my aim. But somehow the literary work, to some extent, got eclipsed, but in many people's minds and in my own life, by the work that it generated. Because the strange thing, and this is what connects the Southwark Mysteries with Crossbones, was that night of when I wrote the first poem and walked around the streets. As I say, we went to places like the site of the Tabard, where Chaucer and the Pilgrims set off for Canterbury, or the site of the Globe, or Southwark Cathedral, which was Mary Overy Dock, the Church of St. Mary Overy. So these are sort of magical places that I'd heard about in my research, and in a way, my mind, in this very enhanced state, you could say, was simply looking at them in a new light, which was in itself fascinating. But there was something else happening, which was this guiding hand of the goose, this sense of someone who'd taken over the show. That's the best way I can explain it. It was like a show in every sense. a revelation of a different kind of history, perhaps. You know, people use the word herstory,
Mm-hmm.
and that's in a way, this was definitely a Goose's, a medieval sex worker's take on what's holy and sacred and good in the world, and it became very powerful. So in the middle of the night, she took John Crow and me to the gates of this industrial site and made it really clear that this was the holiest place we'd visited. You know, we'd just been up at the cathedral, but no, this is the place, this dump, looking through a rusty iron gate. And this was when these fragments of, well, we know how the carrion crow does feast in our Crossbones graveyard, which, when it came through, it really did give me the shivers. And it was kind of, I felt it was intended to. It was like, at the time, it was the goose letting me know, no, this is serious business, boy. Don't, you know, don't think you can just fuck around with this. Something big is here. And yeah, it was very, very weird. But at the time, I sort of felt it had come out of my imagination. And it was only about a couple of weeks later, I went to the local studies library, started researching, and found a reference to Crossbones as a real place, and then connecting it with the Single Women's Churchyard, which is a sort of semi-apocryphal bit of history about how the women who worked in the brothels owned by the church were denied Christian burial. And so they had their own burial ground, and the myth that this was Crossbones. And this was what the sense that I had, was that I'd sort of not so much made anything up, but that I'd reconnected with an ancient sort of archetype or myth that was simply kind of reinventing itself through me, through my own contemporary language and way of seeing the world, but still with its own imprint to let me know, now the goose was here. This is the goose's teaching. And that's how it works. So very soon it led me to, firstly, to perform the vision books of the Southwark Mysteries as part of the Halloween of Crossbones. And that was 13 annual rituals. So for 13 years, every Halloween, we performed this ritual, beginning with the poems, the vision books, which are exploring all these ideas of spiritual transformation happening in the borough around the time of the millennium, and that spreads out into a campaign to save Crossbones itself, the physical space. And it wasn't initially the idea, but it just took hold, and it took hold of my life and my wife Katie's life, and many friends at Crossbones who sort of started appearing, because suddenly the graveyard, it seemed to wake up. It really seemed to wake up. So we started, first we did the Halloween ritual every year, but overlapping with that, by 2004, we were meeting every month on the 23rd of every month at 7 p.m. And that tradition has continued right through, completely unbroken, even during COVID, when officially it wasn't happening. People we know were still turning up and meeting at the gates. You know, it's one of those strange places that calls people in so many different ways. But to me, to me, it's first and foremost, it's dedicated to sex workers. And that's really important, because it's something, you know, that really hasn't been acknowledged in our culture, that the sort of lies that are told about prostitution from the tabloid press, but through the centuries, really. Through doing the work at Crossbones, I got to know quite a few contemporary sex workers, including a lot of quite empowered people whose narrative is so different from the dominant narrative we're told about of this sort of evil underclass. And I think so, but opening out from that, Crossbones is the outcast graveyard. An outcast is very often a self-defining thing in this society, and this is what we've sought to make it. I think I'm happy to do some questions or comments from you, Kev, because I've tried to keep it brief so as not
No,
to.
no, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. That was all. So, Crossbones before your involvement and the shrine and the regular meetings. Crossbones was just a graveyard at this
No,
point.
it wasn't a graveyard. It
Right.
wasn't recognized as a graveyard. It
Right.
was a site awaiting development.
So it
It
was
was
just
described it was described in the development application as a derelict industrial site. There was no mention of a graveyard.
right.
This was the this was the extraordinary thing of how it caught hold of us all, because it was like they were trying to push it through, but I myself and there was a woman who campaigned from a completely different angle, but ultimately we complemented each other. What happened? Had tuned into the fact, yeah, it's a graveyard. There's no question. They've just dug up some bones as well. You know, the more we looked into it, the more full on it was. They'd been building. Yeah, I haven't said this. So when I researched it, it turned out that they destroyed the eastern part of Crossbones when they built the Jubilee Line extension, and this is the electricity substation. So whenever you travel on the Jubilee Line around London Bridge, you're being powered from this great dynamo sunk into the outcast graveyard. And they completely destroyed that part of the graveyard. They officially removed 148 skeletons, which this
A
was
lot.
Museum of London, and they estimated that was a small percentage. They estimated the total burials were probably 15,000. So this was in the whole graveyard. So then we started campaigning to save what was left. And that was, which is about 2/3 of the original graveyard, as far as we can tell. And initially it was up for development with 3 tower blocks. And yeah, it was a long history, too long and complicated to tell, with loads of appeals, lots of legal work, but lots of magic as well, and things just working out in amazing ways. And especially one of the great things of Crossbones was discovering that there are people on the inside of establishments who sometimes want to help, genuinely want to help, because they actually get it. And we had that all the way along. We had people from the people who we were supposed to be fighting, and sometimes had to talk tough with, like Transport for London, but they were like huge organization. And Friends of Crossbones was really me and Katie and a few outlaw mates doing a kind of a piece of performance art. That's sometimes how I like to think of it, because to me it's deeply, deeply spiritual and magical as well. But I want it to be accessible to everybody, and I think that's quite important. If you say it's also just a performance, some people get together on the street and they honor the outcast, and we do these rituals, we tie ribbons, and we remember our own dead, especially those of us who feel in some way marginalized or shut out, or it's amazing how many people do come to Crossbones from all sorts of backgrounds who have some sort of experience like that, and who actually feel real healing thing from coming to a place that says, yeah, this is for the bad people. This isn't for the holy holies. This is for people who live a life, make mistakes, but still have a spiritual dimension to their lives. And to me, that's what the goose embodies, this whole idea of a tradition on Bankside that's it's the tradition of Shakespeare and ballads and music, and this whole culture, which was totally mixed up, of course, with the world's oldest profession. I mean, Bankside was the pleasure quarter, and English theatre, Shakespeare's theatre, was born in a red light district. And like I said, I think earlier, Shakespeare, I think, is the first man to use the term Winchester goose very playfully.
Yeah, we created a lot of our language, actually.
Yeah,
Responsible for a lot of our slang and stuff.
exactly.
I wanted to clarify something and then maybe ask you a couple more questions.
If
So,
you've got time.
yeah, quite. So, you had this vision of the goose, and then you found out that there were people actually buried there. Is that what happened? It happened. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah, very much.
something shamanic going on, basically.
I would say so, yeah, because it was that sort of it was the key. Do you get me? It was like the goose showed me there the key. It was like she did. She took me there that night and said, "This is the place. This is," and it's like it was rusty gates. It was tin cans rattling around and paper. It was a shit. It looked like a shithole. I mean, that
It
was
was an
almost the whole point
industrial
of it.
waste, basically. That and but we didn't. But you didn't know that there was actual history there, and
At
that
that stage, not, but very soon I discovered that. And the thing was, you see, that night when I went walking around and visiting places in mind and body, they were places I'd researched and I knew about the Winchester geese, but somehow I didn't know about crossbones. It was a different branch of a different story, if you get me.
right.
And it's like, it's quite funny in the years since, at times Transport for London tried to prove that my story wasn't historically accurate, which is kind of funny because I only ever claimed to be a poet having a vision rather than a historian researching. So that was funny always to me. But yeah, it to me it what I did was, or what happened that night and what created the goose, I think, was connecting this idea of a graveyard for sex workers and outcasts, especially women, with the idea of the women, the Winchester geese, being, in a sense, protected by the church, because they were governed by ordinances, which in a way regulated their behavior, of course, as well. And you can argue that the church preyed on them to some extent, but they also gave them a measure of protection. So for one of the periods in our history, sex workers actually did have some protection from, say, stew holders, brothel keepers, keeping women against their will.
Wow.
It's quite interesting, that you get 1,000 years ago rules and regulations that recognize,
These
yeah,
these
the
women
world's oldest profession. Why not have rules? Why not recognize these things go on and create best practice and try and really protect against real abuse, trafficking, and slavery, instead of what I think happens, and this is what the Southern Mysteries is very much about, is the Puritan mind sort of fetishizes sex as a sort of something that makes it unable to approach things with the same equanimity that we
yeah,
approach other things. We look at other industries, we look at good and bad practice, we see the horrific abuses sometimes within industries, and we try to reform them and reward the industries that have good practice. And yet you suggest doing that in the sex industry, and it's kind of like, that for years that was really heresy to suggest such a thing, because it had to be, especially in the tabloid press, it has to remain in that position of both titillating but also to be condemned. And this is what I think is so fascinating for me about Crossbones and the Goose, is the embracing of a kind of flawed humanity that we are, saying, no, this is interesting. This is, people have cracks in them. And
yeah.
that's,
The
yeah,
oldest profession is the oldest profession for a reason. We all have
yeah,
desires. We all have, yeah, needs.
yeah.
Yeah, whether the
So it
need.
was a way of reaching out to a bigger sense of inclusion, I would say, of
Yeah,
what
I
I
would
would
say
call.
just from an outsider's perspective, there being like 15,000 odd bodies in one place. That's a lot of energy, and that most of them would have had a similar story. That's a lot of energy. That's also almost feels like a pressure cooker. Like there's all these stories just hiding under the ground, and it was almost as if, okay, if this spirit doesn't converse with the right being, nobody's going to hear these stories, and there's just going to be an industrial estate on top of it, and it had to be expressed somehow. Yeah, it's interesting the phrase you used right at the start of talking about the poem coming, was saying how it came down to you, I think was the phrase you used. And yeah, I very much, especially when I'm writing poetry, it often feels like I'm just this vessel, and this poem is coming down from some source of inspiration. It feels like it's from above, and it feels like it's coming through me, and it feels like it gets filtered through my personality. I'm writing it my way, and I'm throwing in my influences, but it's not all coming from me, it's coming through me, which is an interesting perspective as well. Yeah, we have 10.
Yes, to all of that. Yeah. I think all writers, we're looking for something to come through us. And I think it was the conjunction you mentioned a moment ago, the fact that it had just been dug up, and that it clearly was contested land, and all the pain that you mentioned of these 15,000 spirits. So the early years were very turbulent, I mean, psychically for me. I mean,
Wow, I can imagine.
I think I was, I had a spell. I was very messianic as well, which scary time.
I think that's part of at least most people's spiritual journey. We've only got about 10 minutes left, but I'm going to do a slight aside. In my experience, as part of the spiritual journey, most people begin to realize synchronicities and magical coincidences in their lives. And it's very easy, if you haven't got a wider perspective. And I went through something similar myself. It's very easy to see all these synchronicities and think, I must be the center of the universe. Yes. Everything's about me. But the truth is, synchronicity is happening all the time, and it's happening for everyone. And when our perspective is expanded, we start to see all the connections. But it's not that the connections have just started happening. They were always happening, but you were having a mundane life with mundane people, so the synchronicities weren't obvious. But when you start having crazy coincidences with magical characters, and you start to follow those synchronicities, and you see them multiply, then it's very easy to think, I must be the mighty one, everyone's waiting for the truth one. And the truth is, like, often trying to be the messianic one and the messenger is counterproductive. People don't want to hear it. They're going to call you a lunatic and or a conspiracy theorist when you may be telling entirely the truth, and your words might be entirely right. So yeah, that's, in witnessing my own stumbles with that, I've tried to help guide other people out of it, but sometimes you just can't, it's just people are on their path, and it's like, I'm the one, and I'm going to tell everybody I'm the one. And
I think it is often, like you say, it's a part of the path, and if you're lucky, someone pulls the rug from under you quickly enough.
Yeah.
And the Goose was quite good on that. I mean, that was the good thing of having a guide, a muse, whatever she is, who was playful. And yeah, especially if I got too holy and stuff, she was quite good at reminding me who I was. Just this sort of
sounds like a very grounded spirit.
Well, I think she was, and this was what made it possible, because at times in those early years, the thought of 15,000 spirits, some of them probably quite feral and maybe even vicious, God knows, given the lives some of them may have lived.
Yeah, right.
Was quite heavy. And it was something about the Goose. And this is this thing about checking her out and then deciding, no, I will serve her. I will surrender her. It doesn't work for everyone. I mean, this idea of a mediatrix maybe is what it is, or a muse. But for me, it really did help to get me out of the way in the end. I mean, I had to work on it. And as I say, I'd have those moments. I'd think, yeah, it's me, JC, returned at the end of time.
I just want
But
to focus on the positive side of these interviews. I just want to speak a bit more about the community that it's created. So you were talking about people started to meet. Was it weekly? Did you say
monthly, on
month?
the 23rd of every month. Yeah.
23 has been a special number for me, but yeah.
For, for,
So
for me too.
it's created a community that meets on the 23rd of every month still. And I
Yeah.
take it you're in Glastonbury, so I'm assuming you can't make it most of those times. But
Most of the times, but I have been
it's
known. I
good to
was
know that
there
it
in
happens.
July 23rd. I was there for the whole
Yeah.
thing, and there were some beautiful things happening that day. So yeah, I go back when I can, and I mean it's great to see that people have kept the it's evolving all the time, which as it should, but it's also got a simple form of like how we open, how we close, and two or three very simple rituals: the tying of the ribbons, the holding of the light. They allow everybody, like whatever your faith, or if you don't have a faith, people can join in that. That's like a human communion. And that to me is what
Playing with
really
the ribbons
Crossbones
and the holding
is.
of the lights. Can you specify exactly what happens with
So
them?
with the holding of the light, that's our first real ritual after we've opened and talked a bit about why we're there. Is we imagine or we get someone to hold a candle, but each of us thinking of, yeah, we're holding a candle in our heart. And in a sense, each little spark of our conscious or each consciousness with us in this communion is a little spark in the dark, and it's connected with all these other sparks from the past, this transmission. That's what I guess we're trying to tune into, this sense of we are really in communion with the living and the dead, but particularly everyone who's present at that moment. It is like a tuning in. And so we're holding the light, and the idea is we're lighting the open pathways, because one of the blessings we work with very strongly is open pathways. And for all beings, for all of us, because we each have a unique destiny, and may we each be able to fulfill that. So it's just a visualization of the light filling our bodies and flowing out to light the pathways of the world. And what's lovely in that is also to cultivate shining emptiness. And because remember, we're doing this in a back street, but right in the middle of London. So there are helicopters and trains and drunks and, crazy folk of all kinds. And some crazy folk who've come specifically because of what we're doing, So all of that has to be held. And that's where these rituals have really been beautiful, actually, because they do hold people. They give them space also to express themselves, but also there's enough of a hold to bring people back in. So far they've been really wonderful, in fact, as
Amazing.
a way of connecting. But it is this thing of we're meeting in a back street. And so any magic as well, we talk about magic. I think magic there's a simple magic. It's not about hiding in a room to recite some forbidden spell. That's part of the fun of transgressive magic. But I think with something like Crossbones, what's interesting is it has to be stuff you can do in the open and without fear, really, that you're giving people something really bad. So what the magic you do can only be about aligning with a work of healing. To me, at Crossbones, it's so obviously why people love it is because it embodies a bit of healing in London, especially given that part of London. It's ironic, it was where we lived, but I lived half my life there. And really, it was like I fought for Crossbones for 25 years and we've saved it. And everywhere else is pretty much gone. It's high rise, very expensive flats. It's not the place I moved to, and this is the case for many people. It's partly why I had to move. But
Wow.
that's cool. That's cool too, It was good to get me on the land. Are you
Bear
in
with me.
Bristol?
Say again?
Are you in Bristol?
I'm currently in Portugal.
How are you?
Yeah, I grew up in London. I was in London the first 25 years of my life, and then I moved to Bristol in my mid-20s and was there for most of my time until, well, give or take a year in Glastonbury and a year in Bath.
Right.
We've got less than a minute. I just want to say on your behalf that you do mediumship and other shamanistic practices, and we'll put links to anything that you want to promote underneath. But I would also like to say, if there's more you want to talk about specifically, I'm more than willing to have more conversations with you,
Oh,
because
bless you.
I find it really inspiring anyway, and I'm going to find excuses to have more conversations with you, basically.
Cool. Well, encourage people. Thank you, Kev. I really appreciate it. It's good talking to you. Encourage folk. That's my other book, Grail, about Glastonbury, and that's the Southern Mystery. So, a writer, you like to be read. So,
Yeah, right.
anybody wants to get in touch
Okay.
with me.
If anything, I think Grail is the last piece that we haven't promoted specifically.